I never thought silence could be so loud. The garden was glowing that evening. Fairy lights draped between white oak trees, candles floating in glass jars, and petals scattered like confetti over the grass. The violinist played softly as guests turned in their chairs, all eyes waiting for me. But all I could see were the 2 front seats, draped in white cloth, marked "Reserved for Parents," empty. I told myself they'd be late. Maybe traffic? Maybe a forgotten corsage. Maybe, just maybe, they'd walk in smiling, pretending none of the past ever happened. But deep down I knew. They never planned to come. When the music shifted, my bridesmaids glanced toward the path, expecting the familiar sound of heels or my father's heavy steps. Nothing. Only the hum of the violin and the faint rustle of leaves. I took a slow breath and stepped forward, arm in arm with Aaron's uncle, who had kindly offered to walk me down the aisle. My bouquet trembled slightly in my hand. Every petal looked too perfect, too fragile, like my hope. People smiled as I passed, but I could feel their whispers. Her parents didn't show? How awful. Poor girl. They didn't mean to be cruel, I suppose. But pity burns hotter than insult. Aaron stood beneath the arch, wearing the same patient smile he'd had since the day we met. His eyes softened when they found mine. Steady, kind, promising that I wasn't alone. That was the only thing that kept me moving forward. Still, I felt that ache in my chest, that familiar emptiness I had carried since childhood. I grew up craving my parents' approval like air, but it was always just out of reach. My sister Amelia was the sun to them. I was the shadow that followed behind. And tonight, they made sure everyone saw it. When I reached the altar, Aaron took my hand and whispered, "You look beautiful." I smiled, or tried to. "Thank you," but my voice cracked. The officiant began to speak, words about love, about unity, about families joining as one. And all I could think was, mine had never even tried. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Aunt Ruth dabbing her tears with a tissue. She had called me that morning, gently asking if I'd heard from them. I lied, said yes, said they'd be there, because some lies are easier than admitting the truth. The ceremony went on, vows, laughter, applause, all blending into a blur of color and noise. The moment should have been radiant, unforgettable. Instead, it felt hollow in places only I could feel. When the officiant asked who gives this woman away, a hush fell over the garden. Aaron's uncle cleared his throat and answered for them. The guests smiled, but I froze. I wanted to look toward those empty chairs again, but I couldn't bear it. Because if I did, the tears would come. I remembered the night I told my mother about Aaron, how she frowned when she learned he wasn't from our kind of family. Not wealthy, not powerful. Just good, honest. The kind of man who fixed his neighbor's fence without being asked. They called me impulsive, said I was marrying beneath myself, that I'd regret it, but regret was theirs, not mine. As the vows ended, Aaron's hands tightened around mine, grounding me. "It's just us now," he whispered. I nodded. The words sank deep. It's just us now. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. Confetti fluttered through the air. And yet, beneath the music and the laughter, I could still hear the silence of those 2 empty chairs. After the ceremony, while everyone danced and toasted, I slipped away for a moment. I stood near the arch, the night air brushing against my skin. The candles flickered, their light catching the shimmer of my veil. I stared at those chairs again, untouched, perfectly arranged, like ghosts waiting to be seen. I imagined my mother sitting there, whispering critiques about the flowers, my father checking his watch, impatient as always. I imagined them pretending to smile for the photos, pretending we were normal, pretending they cared, and maybe for a second I wished they had come. Not because I needed their blessing, but because I wanted them to see what they'd thrown away. Aaron found me there, quiet under the garden lights. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "They missed something beautiful tonight," he said. I leaned into him, inhaling the warmth of his scent. "They've missed beautiful things their whole lives," he smiled softly, kissing my forehead. "Then let's make sure they never have that power again." I nodded, but my heart still ached. Because even when you've stopped needing someone's love, the absence of it can still echo. The night ended with laughter and sparklers. We waved goodbye to friends, thanked everyone for coming, and drove off into a future that felt both fragile and fierce. But as the music played one last time and no one came down that aisle, something in me quietly died. I used to think love was something you could earn, like a grade, a prize, a gold star on the family scoreboard. Our house looked perfect from the outside. White walls, iron gates, roses trimmed into obedience. Inside, everything smelled of furniture polish and restraint. My mother's laughter was rare. My father's voice was law. Dinner was at 7 sharp, conversations rehearsed like polite theater. My brother Ethan would talk about his debate trophies or his plans to study business, and my parents would glow like he'd just cured cancer. Then their eyes would turn to me, waiting for me to match him. "I got top marks on my marketing project," I'd say, hoping for the same warmth. Mother would smile faintly. "That's nice, dear, but you should really think about something more serious. Marketing is just slogans and colors, isn't it?" Father would clear his throat, cutting through the air like a blade. "Your brother's thinking long-term. You should do the same," Ethan would smirk. He didn't have to say anything. Their praise did it for him. That was the rhythm of my childhood. His victories were celebrations. Mine were steps in the right direction. Our family wasn't cruel in the loud way. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just the quiet kind. The kind that chips away at your confidence one polite sentence at a time. My mother loved appearances. She called it standards. Every curtain had to hang just so. Every meal was planned 3 days ahead. Even our smiles had rules. "Never too wide, Claire. You look desperate when you laugh like that." I learned early that silence kept the peace. I stopped sharing dreams after the 10th time they laughed. I stopped showing excitement after my mother said it was childish. And I stopped trying to be understood after realizing I never would be. Ethan, meanwhile, could do no wrong. When he crashed his first car, Father said, "It's all part of learning." When I came home late from a group project, Father said, "Irresponsible. A daughter should know better." It was as if we lived in 2 different houses built from the same walls. There was one day I'll never forget. My college graduation. I had worked 3 jobs just to stay afloat. I invited my parents weeks in advance. They arrived 20 minutes late, of course, dressed as if attending a charity gala. After the ceremony, I handed my mother my diploma, proud, trembling a little. She laughed softly. "Marketing, huh? So you'll be selling toothpaste or cereal now?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." Father was already talking to one of the university donors, introducing Ethan. "My son, business major, top of his class. He's going places." No one noticed when I slipped away to the restroom and cried quietly in a stall. That day, I made myself a silent promise. I would never again beg them to see me. It's strange how small moments can define a lifetime. One offhand comment, one dismissive glance, and before you know it, you've built your identity around proving them wrong. For years, I tried to be the daughter they could be proud of. I dressed how they liked, spoke how they wanted, even dated men they approved of, polished, boring, self-assured. Each one made me feel smaller, more invisible. Then I met Aaron. He wasn't what they'd call proper. He fixed cars, not stock portfolios. He wore calloused hands and a soft heart. And for the first time, someone saw me. Not the performance, not the daughter in comparison, but the woman beneath it all. I didn't tell my parents about him for months. I knew what they'd say, that I was settling, that he wasn't our kind. When I finally did, my mother sighed as if I'd just confessed to a sin. "Claire, dear, she said. You could do so much better. Better. That word has haunted me all my life. Better grades. Better friends. Better choices. Never enough, just better. But Aaron never asked me to be better. He just asked me to be honest. Looking back, maybe that's why my parents didn't come to the wedding. It wasn't rebellion that drove them away. It was exposure. My love, my happiness, my freedom, they didn't fit into their picture-perfect world. And to them, anything that didn't fit didn't exist. I used to think love was something you could earn. But in that house, it was more like a currency, given only when you played by their rules and when you stopped playing. They stopped pretending to care. You learn to stop asking for love when every request sounds like a burden. Aaron wasn't the kind of man who tried to impress people, and maybe that's what impressed me most. He didn't talk about success like it was a trophy. He talked about building it, brick by brick, literally. He was an architect, the kind who could sketch a dream on a napkin and turn it into a home. He had a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from earning everything you have, not being handed it. When we first met, I was working as a junior marketing consultant. I'd just landed a small account for a local bakery and thought I'd won the lottery. Aaron was helping the same owners redesign their storefront. I was there for slogans and color palettes. He was there with blueprints and rolled-up sleeves. I remember him looking up from his sketches, smiling. You're the first person who actually asked what the space feels like instead of what it sells. It wasn't a line. He meant it. And from that moment, I was gone. Aaron listened when I spoke, not just with polite nods, but with genuine interest. When I told him about my parents, the expectations, the comparisons, the silences, he didn't try to fix it. He just held my hand and said, "You don't have to earn love, Claire. You already deserve it." No one had ever said that to me before. Our relationship grew slowly, the way steady things do. We cooked dinner together in his small apartment, took late-night walks through quiet neighborhoods, dreamed out loud about the future. He wanted to design homes that felt like safe havens. I wanted to build brands that made people feel seen. We didn't have much, but we had peace, something my childhood home never offered. After 2 years together, Aaron proposed. It wasn't at a fancy restaurant or on a trip abroad. It was in our tiny kitchen while we were making pancakes. He held out a simple ring, nothing flashy, and said, "Let's build something that's ours, from the ground up." I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. Telling my parents, though, felt like walking into a storm. I called them one Sunday morning. My mother answered, her voice clipped as always. "Mom," I began carefully. "I wanted to tell you. Aaron and I are engaged." Silence. Then a sigh. "Aaron, the architect?" Yes, another pause. "Claire, you're 33. You don't have to rush into anything out of fear of being alone," I laughed nervously. "It's not fear. I love him. He's kind, hardworking, she repeated, as if testing a foreign word. "Does he even own his place yet?" "No, he rents. But he's saving to renting?" Her tone sharpened. "You deserve better than a man who rents." My father's voice joined in the background. "Is this the same man who drives that old blue truck?" "Yes, Dad, that's him." A quiet chuckle. "At least he's handy. Maybe he can fix your mother's porch someday." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I didn't call for your approval. I just wanted you to know." "Well," my mother said briskly, "you have our concern, if that counts for anything." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the phone. Aaron came in with 2 mugs of coffee, smiling. "How'd it go?" I forced a laugh. "Let's just say they won't be fighting for front row seats." He set the cups down, pulled me close, and said softly, "That's okay. We'll fill the seats with people who actually love you." But a part of me still hoped they'd change their minds. Weeks passed. We sent out invitations, booked a small garden venue, and planned a simple ceremony, just friends, laughter, and light. I mailed my parents' invitation with shaking hands, sealing the envelope with hope. Ethan's RSVP came first, or rather, his message. Congrats, sis. Heard you're marrying the handyman. At least you'll never have to pay for renovations. Followed by a laughing emoji. That's the thing about mockery from family. It cuts deeper because it carries your history. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on building the kind of life they'd never understand. The kind built on kindness, not competition. As the wedding day grew closer, I tried not to think about whether they'd come. I convinced myself they'd surprise me, that maybe deep down parents always show up for their children, but the mailbox stayed empty. No card. No message. No call. Just silence. Their favorite language. And that silence grew louder each day until it became its own kind of answer. When the RSVP deadline passed, Aaron looked at me gently. Do you want to reach out again? I shook my head. No, if they wanted to come, they would have. That night I sat by the window, the wedding invitation I'd sent them open on my lap. Their names, written in my best handwriting, suddenly looked childish, like a daughter still trying to be seen. I whispered to the paper, I wish you'd at least said no, because rejection at least is an answer. Silence is just erasure. When their reply came, it wasn't a card, it was silence. The violinists began to play, soft and tender, like the sound of forgiveness I hadn't found yet. The air smelled of lilacs and candle wax, and the sky stretched wide and gold above the garden. It should have been perfect, and it almost was, except for 2 empty chairs in the front row marked reserved for parents. They sat like ghosts, haunting the edges of my happiness. I kept glancing at them as guests whispered, trying to hide their pity behind polite smiles. My aunt leaned toward another guest, whispering something I pretended not to see. Even the officiant hesitated for a breath before beginning. Aaron's hand found mine. His palm was warm, steady. You're not alone anymore, he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. And that was the moment I stopped shaking. I took a deep breath, looked at him, and decided I wouldn't let their absence write over my joy. As I walked down the aisle, the string lights swayed gently above, and I could almost imagine my own heart sinking to the music. Fragile, hopeful, determined. Aaron's eyes never left mine. There was no pity there, no judgment, just love. The kind that asks for nothing, promises everything. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman?" a quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. There was no one to answer. I swallowed hard and spoke for myself. I do. A few guests chuckled softly, but it wasn't laughter. It was admiration. I felt my strength rise like the first sunrise after a storm. During the vows, I stumbled once. Not on the words, but on the weight of what they meant. Love, honor, cherish. Words my parents used to decorate speeches, never to live by. Aaron squeezed my hand gently, steadying me. Hey, he whispered, smiling. You're doing great. I smiled back through tears. I know. And for the first time, I truly did. When we exchanged rings, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't losing a family that never wanted me. I was gaining one that I chose. The guests clapped, music swelled, and for a moment, everything felt light. After the ceremony, laughter filled the garden. Our friends danced barefoot on the grass. My college roommate gave a toast that had everyone in tears. Aaron's mother hugged me like she'd known me all her life, but even surrounded by joy, a small ache lingered, like a note that won't resolve. I found myself stepping away from the noise, wandering toward the edge of the garden where the fairy lights faded into the trees. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Fireflies blinked lazily, and for the first time that day I let myself breathe. I sat on a wooden bench beneath a maple tree and stared back at the glowing tent. From a distance it looked like a painting. Laughter, movement, love. The kind of scene I'd always imagined my parents being part of. I pulled my veil off, letting it fall beside me. My reflection caught faintly in a glass lantern nearby, soft curls undone, eyes tired but alive. I whispered into the quiet. I thought they'd at least call. The wind rustled the leaves, answering with silence. Somewhere inside, Aaron was laughing with our guests. The music had shifted to something upbeat. I could hear the thud of dancing feet, the cheer of clinking glasses, life moving forward. And there I was, sitting beneath the stars, realizing that this quiet ache was the price of letting go. But beneath the ache, something new stirred. Not anger, not grief. Something steadier, defiance maybe. For so long I'd lived in the waiting for approval, waiting for love, waiting for them to see me. But tonight, I made a silent promise. This would be the last time I waited for them. I would build a life so full, so grounded that no absence could hollow it out. When I walked back inside, Aaron spotted me immediately. He extended his hand from the dance floor, grinning. "Where'd you go, Mrs. Lawson?" The way he said my name, Mrs. Lawson, made my heart steady again. "Just outside," I said softly, taking his hand. "Saying goodbye to a few ghosts." He pulled me close as the song changed to something slower. "Then let's make new memories, ones that don't haunt you." I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat against mine. The empty chairs were still there, visible through the tent's open flap, untouched, waiting. But for once, I didn't feel the urge to fill them. If family couldn't show up for my joy, they'd never earn a seat at my success. The apartment smelled faintly of paint and burnt coffee, our own version of new beginnings. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms with thin walls and a leaky faucet, but it was ours. Aaron hung our wedding photo on the wall, the one where I smiled too wide, trying to forget the 2 empty chairs in the front row. "Feels like home, doesn't it?" he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. I nodded, though home was still a foreign word. The kind I used to whisper but never quite believed in. The first months after our wedding blurred together. Long hours, quiet dinners, bills stacked neatly on the counter. Aaron's architectural projects were slow to come, and my job at a local property firm barely covered rent. But each morning, I woke up beside someone who chose me. And that, in its own way, felt like wealth. Still, there were moments when the silence hit harder than any overdue notice. Birthdays passed without calls. Holidays became something we watched through other people's windows. Families gathered around tables, laughter spilling into the night. I used to dial my mother's number, hover over call, then set the phone down. The thought of her clipped voice, "We're busy. Claire," was enough to ruin a good day. One night, while Aaron was sketching designs at the table, I confessed, "Sometimes I wonder if they ever think about me." He looked up, pen paused midair. "You can't live waiting for people who decided to forget you." His tone was gentle, but his eyes carried the kind of truth that hurts and heals at once. It was Aaron who suggested I get my real estate license. "You already do half the work," he said. "Why not make it official?" At first, I laughed. "We can barely afford rent, Aaron." "We'll make it work," he said, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "I believe in you." Those words, simple, unpolished, became my anchor. So I studied at night, after cooking and cleaning and counting coins. I failed the exam twice. Each failure felt like another echo of my mother's disapproval. "You're just not focused enough, Claire." But the third time, I passed. When the results came in, Aaron lifted me off the ground, spinning me around our tiny kitchen. "See? Told you," he said, grinning like it was his victory too. And for the first time, the silence from my parents didn't sting. It fueled me. Work was hard. Real estate wasn't the glamorous dream it looked like online. I knocked on doors that never opened, smiled through rejections, watched wealthier agents close, deals that slipped through my fingers. But something inside me had changed, the kind of grit that comes from being underestimated too many times. Every no became a brick in the foundation I was building, not just for clients, but for myself. When my phone buzzed one evening, and the caller ID read Mom, my heart froze. I let it ring out. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared more about my peace. That winter, work picked up. Aaron and I moved to a slightly bigger apartment, one with sunlight and enough space for a small desk. I started networking, learning the market, closing small deals, each one a tiny rebellion against the version of me they once pitied. And then, one night it happened, a client I'd been chasing for months, a quiet older couple, called back. They wanted to buy the lakefront property I'd been showing. When the papers were signed and the ink dried, I sat in the car and stared at the check. My hands trembled. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. I wanted to call my mother, to tell her that the daughter she'd once dismissed was doing just fine. Instead, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and whispered, "You did it." Then I smiled, not the polite smile I used to wear, but the kind that comes from somewhere deep, unshakable. That night, Aaron brought home takeout and a cheap bottle of champagne. We toasted in paper cups. "To the first sale," he said. "To the first of many," I replied. We laughed, our voices echoing off the bare walls. The sound of two people learning that love and ambition can grow in silence. And as I crawled into bed, exhaustion pulling me under, I realized something quietly beautiful. Every ignored call, every empty chair, every quiet dinner, it had all taught me something my family never did. How to stand alone without feeling lonely. How to clap for myself when no one else did. And how to say the words I'd been waiting to hear my whole life. "I'm proud of you, Claire." One night, I closed my first big sale. I didn't call my parents. I called myself proud. The scent of sawdust and coffee became our new kind of perfume. Aaron and I spent weekends knee-deep in old paint cans and half-torn carpets, renovating homes no one else wanted. The kind of houses with cracked porches and forgotten backyards. Places everyone else saw as trouble, but we saw as potential. It started small. One fixer-upper that we could barely afford, we painted the walls ourselves, fixed the plumbing with YouTube tutorials, and ate instant noodles on the floor between shifts. We argued over colors, laughed until the neighbors complained, and fell asleep to the hum of Sanders and Dreams. "Someday," Aaron said one night, stretching his sore shoulders, "we'll build something that's ours, brick by brick." At the time, I thought he meant another house. But he was talking about life, years blurred together like old film, fast and messy but full of motion. By the time I turned 32, we'd flipped 6 houses. Not every project was a win. One collapsed deal nearly broke us. But each failure taught me how to negotiate harder, dream smarter, and protect what mattered. I wasn't the nervous girl who once begged her parents to come to her wedding. I was a woman who knew how to use her voice and her hands to build her own foundation. Our nights became a rhythm of paperwork and paint. Mornings were spent showing listings. Evenings were filled with budgeting, planning, and dreaming aloud. Sometimes Aaron would sneak up behind me while I typed contracts, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You know what's wild?" he'd whisper. "You smile when you talk about square footage." We laughed, but deep down I knew building houses was just an excuse to rebuild myself. 7 years later, a thick folder landed on our kitchen table. The deed, $150,000. Our home. Paid in full, no loans, no co-signers, no help. Just us. Aaron handed me a pen, and my hand trembled as I signed. I'd spent so long trying to prove my worth to people who measured it by last names and dinner parties. And here I was, holding proof of my own success. When we framed the deed, I hung it right above the fireplace. The gold lettering gleamed under morning light. "I built this without their blessing," I whispered, fingertips brushing the glass. "Maybe that's why it means more." Aaron smiled. "Because it's yours." That night, we sat on the porch watching the sunset spill over our freshly painted fence. The world felt quiet again, but this time the silence was warm, earned. Inside, the walls smelled of new beginnings and lemon polish. I'd filled the shelves with books I used to read to escape reality. Now, they simply reminded me how far I'd come. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of waiting. I didn't wonder if my parents thought about me, or if my brother had finally settled down. I had stopped building bridges to places that only burned me. One afternoon, a knock at the door interrupted my paperwork. A courier stood outside holding a neatly sealed envelope. "Mrs. Claire Bennett?" he asked. My chest tightened at the sound of my maiden name. "I don't use that anymore," I said, signing the delivery slip anyway. When I closed the door, I stared at the envelope, white, crisp, printed with a familiar emblem, the Meadow Ridge Neighborhood Association. The sender line shimmered in embossed ink, Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Bennett, my parents. Inside, a folded invitation. "You are cordially invited to the annual Meadow Ridge Fundraiser Gala, hosted by Jonathan and Elizabeth Bennett." For a moment, I couldn't move. The letters blurred. My mother's signature at the bottom, elegant, detached, looked exactly as it did the day she signed my tuition check with a sigh. 7 years. Not a word. And now, suddenly, an invitation. Printed, formal, soulless. Aaron found me standing by the window, envelope trembling in my hands. "What's that?" he asked. I passed it to him, my voice barely above a whisper. "A fundraiser invitation," he frowned. "From them?" I nodded. Outside, the world was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet I'd earned. This one buzzed with old ghosts, memories clawing at the door I'd long since closed. I looked at the framed deed on the wall, my proof, my pride, my peace, and felt something cold and familiar crawl up my spine. For years, I'd believed I was done waiting, done hurting. But that letter, with its perfect edges and polite words, felt like a test, a reminder that no matter how far I'd come, some things never truly stayed buried. I placed the envelope on the table, my heartbeat steady but sharp. The ink from their names gleamed under the kitchen light, Jonathan and Elizabeth Bennett. And for the first time in 7 years, I whispered their names out loud. The Bennetts. The name that once broke me had just found its way back into my home. Just found its way back into my home. The rain had been falling since dawn, the kind that whispered rather than poured. Soft, steady, like an old friend trying to comfort you without words. I sat by the window with a mug of coffee, watching the drops slide down the glass. When I saw her, Mrs. Hughes, she was shorter than I remembered, wrapped in a beige wool coat and holding a paper bag that probably smelled of lemon cookies. Her white hair peeked out from under a knitted hat, and her smile, the same one I'd known since childhood, could still warm any room it entered. I hurried to the door. "Mrs. Hughes?" She grinned. "Still recognize me, huh? I wasn't sure if success had made you too fancy for old ladies like me." I laughed and hugged her before I could stop myself. Her coat smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, the scent of simpler times. "Never," I said. "Come in, please." She stepped into the living room and paused, her eyes tracing the photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, business certificates, and that framed house deed. My, she said softly. "You've built yourself a home worth being proud of." We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our cups as she unpacked her cookies. They were just as I remembered, slightly uneven, perfectly sweet, and somehow full of comfort. "I almost didn't come," she said, taking a sip of tea. "But when I saw the address on your Christmas card, I thought, well, the girl finally planted her roots. I needed to see it for myself." Her eyes softened. "How have you been, dear?" The question lingered longer than expected. I told her about the years after the wedding, the work, the struggle, the quiet victories. I left out the tears and the nights I stared at my phone, waiting for a call that never came. Somehow she already knew. "I never forgot the letter you sent me," I said after a pause. Mrs. Hughes smiled knowingly. "The one with the lavender paper?" "Yes." Her words were still etched in my heart. "Child, silence is not weakness, it's patience. One day, those who ignored your voice will hear your strength." I'd read that letter 100 times in the first year of my marriage, tracing each loop of her handwriting like it was a prayer. It kept me from becoming angry, I admitted. Every time I wanted to lash out or prove myself, I remembered your words. She reached across the table and placed her frail hand over mine. That's because you listen not just with your ears, but with your spirit. Some people spend a lifetime trying to do that. The afternoon light shifted to gold as we talked about everything and nothing. Her garden, the neighbors, the way the town had changed. She told me stories of my grandmother, the one woman who had truly believed in me when I was a child. She used to say, Mrs. Hughes recalled, smiling wistfully, "Claire has her mother's face but her father's stubborn heart. Someday that will save her." I blinked back the sting in my eyes. "I wish she'd been here for my wedding." "She was," Mrs. Hughes said gently. "Not in the way you wanted, but in spirit. You carried her strength down that aisle." For a moment, the room was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't ache. When she stood to leave, the rain had stopped. A soft glow filled the sky, painting the world in muted pastels. At the door, she turned and looked at me with the kind of wisdom only years can give. "You'll get your moment, Claire," she said. "Just don't let it turn you bitter." Her voice was calm but firm, the way a lighthouse speaks to ships before the storm. I nodded. "I'll try," she smiled. "No, dear. You'll succeed. You always do." Then she pressed something into my hand. A folded note. Written in her familiar cursive. "For when the past comes knocking," she said, eyes twinkling, and then she was gone. The house felt quieter after she left, the air heavy with her words. I sat back down at the table and stared at the untouched envelope. The fundraiser invitation from the Bennetts. Its white paper gleamed under the soft lamplight, crisp and perfect, as if daring me to open it again. I slid it aside, telling myself I'd deal with it later, but deep down, I knew that single invitation would find a way to open doors I'd spent years sealing shut. I set the invitation aside, not knowing that soon, the past I'd buried would walk right up to my doorstep, dressed in charm, smelling of old regrets, and calling itself family. The night hummed with quiet luxury, soft jazz echoing from the speakers, crystal glasses catching golden light, the scent of white lilies weaving through the air. The fundraiser had begun. People moved gracefully from room to room, admiring the architecture, the handcrafted furniture, the wide glass doors that opened into the garden. Every corner of this house held my fingerprint, my vision, my effort, my story. I walked among the guests with practiced calm, the kind that comes from years of pretending not to hurt. Smiling, shaking hands, accepting compliments. "Your home is stunning, Claire. Did you design the layout yourself? Your story's an inspiration." Each praise felt surreal, like a mirror reflecting who I had become, not who I used to be. Aaron stood across the room, greeting a group of investors. He caught my eye and gave a small nod, that quiet, reassuring smile that said we made it. Mrs. Hughes sat near the fireplace, sipping tea, her eyes gleaming with pride. She looked exactly as she had the day she'd told me, "Don't let success turn you bitter." I had tried to live by that, but tonight, as laughter filled the rooms I built with my own hands, a strange tension whispered at the back of my mind, the kind you feel when the air shifts before a storm. It happened just past 8. I was standing near the grand staircase, answering questions about the house's renovation process, when I heard it, a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a decade. "Oh, Jonathan, look at this place. It's exquisite." I froze. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass. Then came another voice, deeper, colder. "Impressive. Whoever owns it must have good taste." And then, Ethan's laugh. Low, smug, unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. They were here. I turned slowly toward the entrance. 3 figures stood framed in the doorway. My mother in her signature pearl set, my father adjusting his cufflinks, Ethan smirking like he belonged everywhere. They looked older, sharper lines, tired eyes, but their presence still carried that air of superiority, that invisible chill I'd known since childhood. They didn't see me at first. They were too busy greeting the event coordinator, handing over coats, making small talk. Then my mother's gaze drifted up. Our eyes met. The room seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Her lips parted, a faint gasp escaping before she whispered, "Claire!" Every conversation in the room dulled into background noise. I took a steady breath and crossed the floor toward them, calm, composed, unhurried. My heels echoed against the hardwood like a countdown. When I stopped before them, the silence thickened. Ethan's grin faltered. My father's face drained of color. "Welcome," I said softly. "You're right on time." My mother blinked, her voice trembling as she glanced around. "This is your house?" I let the question hang, watching realization flicker behind her carefully painted expression. Finally, I nodded. "Yes, it's amazing what you can build when no one shows up for you." Her breath hitched. My father looked away, his jaw tightening. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, muttering something under his breath that even he didn't believe. For a long, fragile moment, no one spoke. Mrs. Hughes, seated nearby, set down her teacup with a faint clink. She didn't need to say a word. Her eyes said everything. "You got your moment, Claire." I turned toward my guests, my voice steady. "Everyone, thank you for being here tonight. I'm honored to host this fundraiser in support of local housing for underprivileged families, because everyone deserves a place they can call home." A ripple of applause followed. My parents stood frozen in the doorway, their presence small against the applause meant for me. When the crowd dispersed again, my mother stepped closer. "I didn't realize," she began. Her voice was thin, brittle. "That I could succeed without your approval," I said gently, tilting my head. "Neither did you." Her eyes glistened, but whether from guilt or wounded pride, I couldn't tell. Ethan tried to speak. "Claire, come on. You can't just—" But my father silenced him with a look. Aaron appeared then, placing a hand on the small of my back. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" I smiled up at him. "Perfect." Then turning to my parents, I added quietly, "Enjoy the evening." "The food is catered. You don't have to pretend to like anything I made." It was subtle, almost kind in tone, but the message landed. My father's eyes hardened. My mother looked as though she might faint. As the night unfolded, I watched them from across the room, guests laughing beside them, unaware of the storm beneath the politeness. They smiled too brightly, complimented too eagerly, trying to hide the discomfort of standing inside the success they once doubted. Mrs. Hughes caught my glance from across the hall and gave a slow nod, her lips curving in a soft, proud smile. "You'll get your moment, Claire," she had said. And now here it was. Not revenge, not triumph. Just truth standing in plain sight. The house glowed with warmth, laughter, music. And amidst it all, my parents stood like ghosts, remnants of a past that no longer had power here. When the evening ended, I walked them to the door. My mother lingered, touching the polished frame of the entryway as if it were proof. "You really built all this?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Every inch. Every brick. Every dream you said was too small." She swallowed hard. My father gave a curt nod, not of pride, but of resignation. I opened the door. "Good night." They stepped out into the cool night air, silent, uncertain, diminished. Inside, the house was quiet again, but this silence didn't ache. It hummed with power. I looked toward Mrs. Hughes, still sitting by the fire. She smiled softly. I exhaled, shoulders finally unburdened. The ghosts had walked into my house tonight, but I was the one who owned it. And in that stillness, beneath the glow of my own creation, I realized some houses are built with wood and stone, others with forgiveness you never need to speak aloud. The evening shimmered with golden light as guests filled the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers threw soft halos over the crowd, and laughter floated like music. I stood by the entrance, welcoming everyone with calm warmth, my name on every lip, my success reflected in every congratulatory smile. It was my night. The charity gala I had organized to fund scholarships for underprivileged students, the same kind of girl I once was. And then they walked in. The Bennetts, my parents, my sister Anna, her husband Ethan. They weren't invited, but apparently, one of the board members had thought it would be nice to include my family. How thoughtful. I watched them from across the room, pretending not to notice as Anna's eyes scanned the hall like a hawk searching for weaknesses. Her mother's diamond bracelet flashed under the chandeliers, the one I was never allowed to touch. Ethan adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. They looked like a family who belonged here, until people started whispering. A voice near the punch bowl murmured, "Isn't that her family? The ones who didn't show up to her wedding?" Another replied softly, "I heard they cut her off years ago." The air shifted. The Bennetts smiled harder, spoke louder, desperate for control. Ethan tried to break the tension first. "Claire," he called too brightly, "you've really outdone yourself. What a stunning event." I turned slowly, my practiced smile effortless. "Thank you, Ethan. It's been a meaningful journey." He chuckled, eyes darting nervously to the guests who'd turned to listen. Anna took his arm, her voice honeyed but tight. "You must be so proud of your family tonight, Claire." Family. The word tasted strange from her lips. Before I could respond, a soft but firm voice cut in. Mrs. Hughes, the head of the foundation and a woman everyone respected, had been standing nearby. She smiled politely and said, just loud enough for the circle to hear, "Funny, isn't it? Families always claim pride after success, though I don't recall seeing the Bennetts at the wedding, do you?" A stillness fell. One of the guests pretended to sip champagne, eyes glinting. My father's face went pale beneath his polished smile. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "we've always known Claire would do well. She was always the ambitious one." "Ambitious?" Mrs. Hughes smiled. "That's one word for surviving on your own." The sentence landed softly, but it shook something deep in me. There was no cruelty in her tone, only truth, dressed in grace. I didn't need to add a word. For years, I had imagined this moment, what I would say if I ever faced them again. I'd pictured speeches, confrontations, tears. But standing there, surrounded by everything I'd built, I felt something purer. Peace. The whispers spread like perfume. Subtle, lingering. Guests exchanged glances. A man I barely knew leaned to another and murmured, "Imagine disowning your daughter and then showing up to her gala." My father caught fragments of it, his posture stiffening. Anna looked ready to bolt. Ethan, poor Ethan, tried to keep conversation alive, but every word landed flat. No one wanted to be seen laughing with the hypocrites. Mrs. Hughes gave me a reassuring nod, then turned to the pianist to request a softer tune. The tension melted into polite music. I excused myself to tend to the donors, leaving my family standing beneath the chandelier, a tableau of discomfort, their masks slipping. From across the room, I saw Anna's jaw tighten, my father's hand gripping his glass too tightly. My mother whispered something sharp, eyes darting toward me, but I didn't look back. I moved through the crowd with purpose, shaking hands, exchanging warmth. My world was no longer theirs to poison. Near the end of the night, I passed by the large glass doors leading to the balcony. Through them, I could see the reflection of my parents, distant, small, lost among people who no longer believed their stories. I almost pitied them. Almost. When the last guest departed, the hall glowed softly under the dying lights. The staff cleared the tables, laughter still echoing faintly from somewhere down the corridor. I stood alone for a moment, gazing at the empty glasses, the wilting roses, the fading music. This was the kind of silence I had once feared. Now it felt sacred. They had shown up to reclaim a piece of me they once discarded, and left with nothing. No shouting, no revenge, just quiet exposure, the kind that leaves a mark deeper than anger ever could. That night, silence spoke louder than I ever could. And in that silence, I finally heard my freedom. It started with flowers. 2 weeks after, the gala. A bouquet of white lilies arrived at my office, unsigned but obvious. My assistant found me reviewing grant applications and placed the vase gently on my desk. The card read, "Proud of you, sweetheart. Love, Mom." Sweetheart. A word she hadn't used since I was 16. The next day came another delivery. A basket of chocolates for Ella with a note in my father's sharp accountant handwriting, "For my granddaughter. Hope she remembers her family." I stared at the message for a long time before tossing it into the bin. They had remembered, but only after the applause. People love to come back when the world starts clapping, but applause doesn't rewrite the story. Their texts began soon after. My mother's were polished, like someone trying to sound gentle after years of noise. "How are you, dear? We've been thinking about you a lot lately." "Ella must be growing so fast. Send pictures?" I didn't reply. Then Anna tried. A single message. "Ethan says hi. We miss you." No, they didn't. They missed the image of me they could brag about at dinner parties. I kept my responses polite, brief, mechanical. "Thank you. I'm doing well." No bridges burned. No warmth offered. Apologies that came after applause mean nothing. One afternoon, as rain tapped softly against my office window, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan. His voice was brittle, tired. "Claire? Hey. Long time, huh?" Could hear the hollow echo of an empty office behind him, the sound of someone pretending things were fine. He cleared his throat. "Listen, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. The firm's in a rough spot. Just a short-term loan. You know, until we stabilize." A pause stretched between us, heavy but calm. I looked out at the city skyline, the same skyline I once thought belonged to people like him. "Ethan," I said quietly, "I hope things work out for you, truly, but I don't lend money to family anymore." He tried to laugh, but it broke halfway through. "Right, yeah, I get it. You're still mad." "No," I said softly. "I'm finally not." He didn't know what to do with that. Most people don't, when forgiveness doesn't come with access. Weeks passed. News of Ethan's failing firm began circulating in the business circles my father once ruled. A few discreet headlines, a few whispers at brunch tables. Then, the Bennetts began losing their audience. The same friends who had once toasted their perfect family stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Business partners grew scarce. One evening, I ran into an old neighbor at a networking event. She leaned in conspiratorially. "Your parents, they're not doing so well socially. Everyone says your mother's been quite withdrawn." I just smiled politely and said, "I wish them peace." Because I did. Not pity, not revenge. Just peace. The kind that follows truth. Every Sunday morning, I'd still take Ella to the park. She'd chase pigeons across the grass, her laughter echoing in the air. Sometimes, I'd see a gray-haired couple walking slowly on the far path, hand in hand. For a flicker of a second, I'd imagine what it might have been like. Parents who showed up, not to claim me, but to love me. But then Ella would call, "Mommy, look at me," and I'd look, because that's where my story lived now, not in what was lost, but in what grew afterward. The silence from my parents stretched for nearly a month. Then, one evening as I was preparing dinner, my phone buzzed again. Mrs. Hughes. Her voice carried that same calm authority I'd grown to respect. "Claire," she said, "I've been meaning to tell you. Your gala inspired 2 new donors. You should be proud." "Thank you," I said, smiling. "It feels good to build something that lasts." There was a pause on the line, a softer note entering her tone. "And how are your parents?" I hesitated. "Trying." I think they're realizing the weight of their choices. She chuckled quietly. They usually do, once the audience leaves. I don't hate them, I admitted, but I can't go back, not even for closure. That's not your job, dear, she said. You've done enough. Let life finish the lesson. Her words sank deep, steady as truth. That night, after putting Ella to bed, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Rain drummed softly on the glass, the kind of steady rhythm that once kept me awake in lonely apartments. Now it sounded like peace. My phone blinked once more. A message from my mother. We miss you. Please call. I turned off the screen. Not out of anger, but acceptance. Because sometimes the most powerful answer is no reply. The silence that says you had your chance. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Inside, Ella's soft breathing filled the quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain, to prove, or to forgive on demand. The lesson was already complete, and as Mrs. Hughes had said, life would handle the rest. The knock came just after sunset. Erin was reading Ella her bedtime story, something about a mouse who wanted to live on the moon, when I heard it. 3 slow taps. Not the sharp, confident kind, but the kind of knock that carries apology in its rhythm. For a moment, I thought it might be a delivery. But when I opened the door, my father stood there. He looked smaller than I remembered. The man who used to fill every room with authority now seemed swallowed by the dusk behind him. His gray suit hung loose, and his eyes, once cutting and certain, carried the soft tremor of someone who'd finally learned what regret weighs. Claire, he said quietly. I hope I'm not interrupting. I didn't know what to say. It had been years since we'd spoken face to face. Erin's voice drifted faintly from the hallway, reading Ella her story. The smell of baked bread and candle wax filled the air. Behind me, the dining table was set. 3 plates, folded napkins, a vase of wildflowers Ella had picked that morning. Home. My home. He glanced past me toward the table, then back at me, eyes glistening. I drove by twice before I stopped, he confessed. Didn't know if I had the right. I stepped aside slightly, but not enough to invite him in. You don't need permission to knock, I said softly. He nodded, swallowing hard. Your mother's been unwell. The silence has taken its toll. I stayed quiet, fingers resting lightly on the doorframe. He exhaled, voice trembling. We made mistakes, all of us. I thought I was protecting you from failure. But I see now, I was protecting my pride. The words landed gently, not as excuses, but as truth finally spoken aloud. I wanted to come sooner, he added, but I didn't know what to say. And then that night at the fundraiser, I saw you standing there. I realized you didn't need anything from us anymore. A pause. Then, with a humility I'd never seen before, he asked, Do we still have a place in your life? For a heartbeat, I felt my younger self stir, the girl who waited at graduations, at birthdays, at the end of every hallway hoping for approval that never came. But then I looked back at my table, 3 chairs, full of laughter and love. The life I built without permission. I met his eyes and said quietly, I offered family a seat once. You didn't take it. He blinked as if each word touched something raw. My table's full now, I continued, with love. With people who stayed. No anger. No triumph. Just truth. He nodded slowly, tears gathering but never falling. I understand, he whispered. That's fair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The porch light hummed softly, and the wind brushed through the garden. Finally, he straightened, the faintest trace of pride, the gentle kind, returning to his posture. You've done well, Claire, he said. Better than I ever imagined. Thank you, I replied, meaning it. He took a step back, hands trembling slightly at his sides. Tell Erin I said hello and tell Ella her grandfather is proud, even if she doesn't know him. I will, I said. He gave one last nod, the kind that says I see you now, even if too late. and turned down the path toward his car. I watched him until the taillights faded into the dark. When I closed the door, the warmth of our little home wrapped around me. Aaron appeared from the hallway, his expression soft, questioning. "Everything okay?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, just a visitor from another chapter." He pulled me close, and for a moment I rested my head against his shoulder, listening to the rhythm of life continuing. Ella's giggles from her room, the clink of plates waiting on the table, the quiet hum of peace. As I set the last dish down, a strange stillness filled me, not emptiness but closure. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. Forgiveness doesn't always sound like welcome. Sometimes it sounds like peace. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, not haunting, just passing. And for the first time since the empty chairs at my wedding, my heart felt whole. The morning light dripped through the curtains like honey, slow, golden, kind. It's been years since the night my father knocked on that door, years since I stood on the porch, holding both forgiveness and boundaries in the same breath. Life, as it turns out, moved on, and so did I. Now, my days start with laughter instead of longing. Aaron's coffee is always too strong, but I've learned to love it. Ella, no longer the chubby-cheeked toddler who once colored on the walls, is 9 now, all imagination and freckles. She spends her mornings at the kitchen table, sketching portraits of our family. Today's drawing shows 4 smiling faces, hers, mine, Aaron's, and Mrs. Hughes. In her world, that's family enough. Mrs. Hughes has become our gentle constant. She visits on Sundays, brings lemon bars wrapped in napkins, and tells Ella stories about gardens and grace. She still calls me child sometimes, even though I'm 33 and running a firm of my own. The business grew quietly, like a tree that no one watered but somehow still bloomed. From one small real estate project to a thriving design firm, homes restored, lives rebuilt, dreams reclaimed. Sometimes clients ask where I learned resilience. I smile and say, from people who didn't teach it on purpose. The house we bought, the one that changed everything, still stands as our anchor. Its walls carry laughter now instead of echoes. We've painted, renovated, filled it with warmth. Yet one thing has never changed, the framed deed hanging in the hallway. Beside it, another frame, our wedding photo. It's my favorite corner of the house. The photo isn't perfect. There's a smudge on the lens, and my smile is fragile, halfway between joy and heartbreak. But maybe that's what makes it real. This morning, as I walked past it, I stopped. My fingers brushed the glass of the deed, the symbol of everything they said I couldn't build. They ignored my wedding, I whispered to the quiet room. But life invited me to something greater, myself. The air felt lighter after I said it. Like the house understood. I often wonder about my parents now, where they live, how they spend their days. I don't ask, and they don't reach out anymore. That absence used to ache like an open wound, but time taught me that not all empty spaces need filling. Sometimes peace comes not from mending, but from accepting what will never be the same. One afternoon last spring, a letter arrived in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a short note from Ethan. Dad's health is fading. Mom stays quiet most days. They talk about you sometimes. I just thought you should know. No request, no guilt. Just a sentence floating between memory and regret. I read it once, folded it gently, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't write back either. Some goodbyes are better left unspoken, not out of resentment, but out of respect for peace finally earned. Now, when I pass the mirror, I see someone different from the girl who once stood under wedding lights waiting for parents who never came. I see a woman who chose to show up for herself instead. That, I've realized, is the quietest kind of revenge and the truest kind of healing. Last weekend, at a charity gala, one of my old classmates recognized me. "You've changed," she said, smiling. "There's something softer about you now," I laughed lightly. That's what peace does. It doesn't make you harder. It just makes you whole. Later that night, I found Ella asleep on the couch, sketchbook open on her lap. On the newest page, she'd drawn a house under a bright yellow sun, with a small note scrawled at the bottom in her uneven handwriting. Built from love. I tucked a blanket around her, tears warming my eyes. She'll never know what it cost to give her this life. The years of silence, the nights of doubt, the ache of being unseen. And that's exactly how I want it. My daughter will grow up knowing that family is chosen, nurtured, and felt, not just shared by blood. Before going to bed, I stood one last time in front of the framed deed and wedding photo. The two moments that defined my story, one built from absence, the other from arrival. And as the night deepened, I smiled to myself, whispering the lesson life had etched into every chapter of my heart. Sometimes, silence isn't emptiness. It's strength that no longer needs to explain itself. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows. The house stood quiet and alive, not a monument to pain, but a home built from what they left behind. And this time, the chairs were all full.